Hey guys, Jared Duckett, Duckett Lad Dental CPAs and Advisors, back on again for another episode here with my business partner Bill Ladd and Dr. Michael Abernathy as well. Guys, appreciate you tuning in. Been a little bit since we've done this, but time to get back to it again.
You bet.
But want to hit on a topic right now. So we are May the 4th, Monday, May the 4th, and a lot of doctors, dental practices, if they haven't already, depending on what state too, are back at it, so they're opening the doors, and it's probably a whole new, different ball game, right? Different stuff that they're looking at, different procedures they have to implement. But what we really wanted to talk about today is specifically financial wise, your cash position and also your debt position. Going into this pandemic, nobody ever saw this coming, right? This was that thing that was never going to happen. And so probably, a lot of doctors can agree, they probably went into this with maybe a lot less cash than they wanted and maybe a little more debt than they wanted. So let's start talking a little bit. And Dr. Abernathy, I'll throw it to you. Is there and from what you're hearing from your clients, is there a rule of thumb, or is there anything that you're advising your clients now to try to save up? Let's talk about cash-wise, cash reserves. Is there an amount you're trying to get them to get to so that this, just like this thing that would never happen, if something happens like this again, they feel better, they feel more secure cash position-wise as opposed to maybe how they felt before?
Right. And that's looking at it after the fall, looking at it, it's always real easy to go back and point fingers. But even before the fall, I would tell doctors they needed an emergency fund to cover them for several months, not because of a pandemic, but any of us could fall and break a wrist. And if it's a wrist, it takes at least 6 weeks to get over a break. Okay. And so, I always kind of thought that way. I always kept 6 months worth of actual costs. Now, we can do that in a couple of ways. One could be cash. One could be a business interruption policy. And again, just like buying a home policy and you live on a beach, and it may cover wind damage, but it might not cover flooding in a hurricane. Okay, so you have to make sure, if part of wearing, suspenders and a belt, like you're kind of really covering yourself here, if you're going to buy some insurance policy, one, it needs to be updated on a semi-regular basis, like every couple of years. Now, generally, if you tell your insurance guy that you need to remind me to do this, they'll hound you till you do it. But that's true with fire. It's true with anything. But for business interruption policy, that's real important. And generally, if your practice grows or you let your debt grow, that policy is not going to be adequate to cover everything. Okay, so that's one thing I'd look at. The cash part, I think about 6 months of actual expenses would be a good idea. Certainly no less than 6 weeks. But so I'm going to use, yeah, go ahead.
When you look at it, Dr. Abernathy, we've always kind of heard keep that cash reserve, and maybe people did, maybe they had a couple weeks, couple of months. Nobody certainly could have seen this coming when they were forced to shut down. But if you just kind of do math in your head, if you were sitting there with 4 to 5 to 6 months of cash versus 2 weeks, that gives you a quite a bit different perspective of how you're looking at this COVID-19 environment and how you treat your staff and really the whole thing. You look at it completely different.
Well, and it's not just looking at it differently. I always look at things. I am kind of a prepper in mind. It's like I'm not weird. Still a little bit weird. I don't have a bunker, but I got everything else. But, I've always had that, well, what if kind of mentality, and I don't want to be caught, I've always saved at least 20% of my collections. It used to be, I guess the going deal was 10%. And now they're saying 14% for the general population, but I'm thinking for dentists, 20%. Just because our lifestyles tend to push the envelope of, I've just never seen anybody, no matter how much they make, there's not a dollar amount that you could make that you couldn't outspend. And you know, it's not just setting that goal of 14% or 20%. It's becoming the person that has that mindset. And so when you said it would give you a different, you know, mindset if you had saved this money, that type of person that would do that would never worry about it. Now, the negative of having all that cash and then having a different mindset might be that you would continue to pay them, your staff, even if you had no income coming in. In a way, that PPP does that. It's like, you know, what's the big sign and goals? Yeah, it says, you know, pick up your own weights. Your mama doesn't work here. Okay, I mean, we kind of have our mama giving us money here that we think is going to be forgiven, and it may just delay the inevitable, and it's not going to affect the real problem that got you there in the first place. You should have, not that anybody can predict this, but a couple of months, you should be able to cover that. And that's not Debbie Downer, shame on you kind of thing. I just think we should have learned in 2009 that stuff happens. And the worst possible thing that can happen to anybody listening to this is you come out of this unchanged. That's why I like Jared and Bill's perspective, is they're constantly looking. Maybe they could predict the causes, but for the most part, they look at the results of your bad choices sometimes when they look at your financials. And that, it's a habit, and a habit's just a grave with the ends kicked out. So again, there are several ways to look at saving this money. One would be the cash, other would be insurance, stuff like that. The third would be this, and I've heard consultants say this: well, you need to have a month and a half's income in accounts receivables. Are you freaking kidding me? I said, I don't have anything in my accounts receivable. I don't have more than when I was working full time, we would do, I don't know, 800 a month. You know, our total accounts receivable was less than 1 week's production. But it used to be they wanted to have 4 to 6 weeks production in accounts receivable. That's a problem, because it's a symptom of poor financial arrangements. And in the day when those terms were bantered around, we didn't have third parties that would step in and loan money to our patients, right? We didn't have care credit. We carried all those ourselves. But their logic on paper sound. If something happened, you would still have money coming in for at least 6 weeks, and that would mitigate any financial deal. I mean, it sounds good on paper, but I would rather you collect everything and then don't spend it, okay? Just sock it away and not do it. I mean, if we said 6 months worth of, or we said 6 weeks, I don't expect you to put it in a checking account. And I see that a lot of times too, where I ask a doctor, how much money do you keep in your operating account, in your checking account for your business? And they'll go, oh, I don't know, 70,000, or 100,000, whatever it is. I said, well, how much do you actually need to keep in there? Because you'd want it earning interest somewhere else if you could. But, and it usually doesn't come up until people are selling their practice. And, it wasn't 75 or 100, it was probably 47. But because they own the business and they could steal from that pot anytime they wanted, it wasn't strategic or tactical for them to take it out. I think of every penny. So.
Hey, we got you. No, it's. I don't know if you guys can hear that. It's hailing like crazy where we're at. So it's.
I couldn't hear it. I mean, I was going, turn on your mic, stupid. I mean, it's like.
It was it's some weird. Well, it's 2020 just keeps. It's the gift that keeps on.
As Jared starts calling, is our insurance guy. You remember that insurance? I want to raise that. So
here comes some of our cash out the door right here.
Yeah, some of the roofing costs. So
one thing you said there that I absolutely love, Dr. Abernathy. I'll never forget the first time that we really spent time together. We were getting a presentation on self-diagnosis and scorecard. And we were talking about cash, and you kind of were talking about profitability. You said, aren't those kind of one and the same? Don't those kind of go hand in hand? And so I love, the fact that you can refer people back to previous videos, we've talked about profitability and metrics and things that should increase profitability, should generate cash. But, you know, with what you're talking about on the accounts receivable side, you know, that's a really easy thing to get kind of lazy about, or not really worried about too much. What do you typically see there, and how do you get people spurred into action and try to get those collections where they need to be?
You know, the first thing, and we talked about this in Diagnose Yourself, I think everybody should just sit down and figure out, let's say in the previous year where we didn't have this COVID, what is 1% of your collections? I mean, I like just taking any problem and knocking it down to the point that I can chew on it and I can actually understand it. I mean, $1 million, that's just too much to think about. But when I think of 1% of that being 10,000, so if I had hygiene at 30%, it should be 33. Then that's 3% that I could have, or $30,000. Or if I only collected 98%, then, you know, that's $20,000. Okay, so I would do that first. You know, look at that. But again, I think it's just a mindset, and I'm hoping that this pandemic will change and alter the way that our doctors look at their office and understand that these things are important. I mean, 80% of your collection should be in current. That would be 0 to 30 days. 30 to 60, maybe 16, 18%. By the time you get to 90, it should be 0.
Yeah.
Nothing. Now, if you do look at that on a monthly basis, the only way that you could screw this up is that if you're doing ortho, or you have something that has a reoccurring charge. In other words, you charge them $5,000, but they're going to pay you monthly. Every software company, maybe Open Dental doesn't, but I know Dentrix and EagleSoft do. They have a reoccurring charge set up so that the computer remembers they owe you $5,000, but this month they owe you $150, and then that $150 would be current, and then they should pay it during that 30 days, and it shouldn't end up in the 30 to 60. If it does, then you start attacking it right there.
Yeah.
Same thing with insurance. The better and quicker you fill these things out and make sure that you send all the x-rays, all the explanations, code it properly. If you don't hear from them within 30 days, you need to be on them like fly on stink. I mean, you know, and so you collect it by the end of the 60 days. And cleanup's kind of 60 to 90, but anything over 90 is, you know, probably not going to get collected.
That's a metric you should be tracking. I mean, that's something you should be looking at all the time is what.
And one thing else about your accounts receivable is that every software has a default setting of giving you the net accounts receivable. Okay. There are debit and credit balances. And when we have an older doctor, there's going to be a credit balance. So at the bottom where you're looking at current 30, 60, 90 and over, the minute you take the credit balances out, the dollar amounts go, they get bigger. Okay. So make sure you're really looking at your aged accounts receivable and not your net accounts receivable.
Yeah. You know, when you think about it, right now is a great time to reset your accounts receivable practice, because that's probably what a lot of these doctors are doing, is hammering their accounts receivable, trying to get every cash, you know, dollar in the door they can. You would hope they would get those old AR kind of cleared out, and maybe they're down to a reasonable balance, and maybe now is the time to look at how you look at your receivables and your collections differently, and set process and procedures around making sure that you're doing what you can to get those dollars in the door.
Yeah, and one thing to think about too, and this might be going off on a tangent a little bit, but you know, doctors opening up today, or they just did start, it's going to take a while for those receivables to start up again. You know, they're not immediately going to start working and the receivables plow in. It's going to take a while to build up and generate. So,
yeah, I mean, we've been out for a while.
Yeah.
And so that's done. And think about the psychology when, I mean, this happens 2 times. Like 2009, when everything was crappy and, you know, people weren't coming back. And then when we're laid off for 2 months and we do this, we go after the accounts receivable. And if our systems and protocols weren't originally set up to not have accounts receivable or you know, deals, we go after them. They're thinking that south end of a northbound horse dentist is after us. I've been out of work for 6 weeks and now he's hounding me for the money.
Yeah.
Or you sell your practice and you don't sell the accounts receivable, same thing happens there too.
Yeah.
So, this is a time where you need to reflect and make changes. But as we start ramping back up, you're going to have to be sensitive to the fact that your clients are probably in a worse situation than you are. And if you're going to make drastic changes, it needs to be gradual a little bit. I mean, people that need credit and have always paid you, I would extend it. People that, have had a hard time, I can remember sending out a letter to everybody that was over 90 days that basically said, hey, look, I know this is horrible, that people are out of work and stuff like that. I said, if you have a problem, you call me and we'll figure out a way to make this work for you. People that were over 120 days, I just forgave their debt. And of the people I forgave the debt, 83% ended up paying me anyway.
Yeah.
I just said, look, it was December, and I said, look, I'm sure something bad has happened. And you don't want to tell me about it. Otherwise you would have paid your bills and stuff. It's forgiven. You'll never get another, deal. I forgive you. God bless you. Please, enjoy your Christmas and the holiday season. It worked incredibly well.
Yeah. Consider that marketing almost.
That's right.
I tell you one other one. I know you don't want these to run very long. I'll tell you one that's kind of funny. I'm always like, thinking of ways to, make these things work. And at a time, we were sending out about 1,200, statements a month. It wasn't a time when we had third parties. We were actually carrying everything. We still collected over 99%. But I had some that were old. And so we had a program where we ramped up the letter. They got just a little bit more aggressive. We always gave them a way to pay by credit card. Always gave them a way to call us and renegotiate and pay it out interest-free for a few months. But I was ramping it up. So I wrote this real letter, and I wanted to put it on one page, but it didn't. It went over to page 2. And I had this little printer on the road, and I just gave them the names, and they would print everything. It was at a time where they didn't have laser printers where it would just automatically change the names. He did it all for me. And so all of a sudden, all this money starts coming back in. I mean, oh my gosh, it was the best letter I had ever written. I thought, man, I'm a genius. And I said, I got to sell this or do something with it. And so finally, about 3 weeks into the deal, after all these people started paying money, the printer came at lunchtime, he says, Dr. Abernathy, I was like his best customer because he was printing everything for me. He says, can I talk to you for a minute? And I went, sure, what's wrong? He said, I found these in the back print room, and it was page 1 of the 2-page deal. And they'd sent nothing but page 2, which basically said, and if we don't hear from you before this date, we will do all of the things that I've listed at the top of the page. And so, sometimes stuff happens and it worked. So
well, hopefully that was before Google reviews were a thing, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, maybe. Okay. But anyway, we're not talking about this. It was like, about the cash reserves and stuff. Is there anything else about that? Because
go back to one thing. I'm trying to put myself in a viewer's shoes and say, okay, you said 6 months of cash. I need 6 months of expenses. So let's throw some numbers to that. Let's say you're $1 million practice, $1 million collections. Yep. Let's say you're running overhead of 60%.
Yep. Okay.
So the math on that, you're 600,000 a year is expenditure wise divided by 12. So you're $50,000 a month, right? So times 6, let's say 3 to 6 months. So that'd be 150 to 300,000, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, and again, it's not going to happen. I mean, there's a time and a season for everything. I mean, when we first start out and we've got all the startup debt, the startup debt, at least have a month. I mean, if you look at the insurance actuarial tables, I mean, they won't even sell you disability at age 64. Okay, they know you're going to crap out. Okay, it's going to be bad. Okay. But it's somebody at 26 to 30 doing this, again, I think maybe the policies will cover a majority of that. So say the cash amount, it's the cash amount plus that instrument you might have to cover you, okay? Yeah. Now, so if you could get 4 weeks worth in cash and cover the rest with an insurance policy or something. Because again, you could even make it where it was like 1 month you could cover yourself, and it's going to cost less because of the term, the waiting period before it kicks in. You can get a higher reimbursement on your business overhead policy. The long, it's kind of like going, like my medical insurance. I think it's a $10,000. I pay the first. I'm not buying it because I can't afford something. I'm buying it in case I have to have a new heart, right?
Yeah.
Some horrible thing. So at first, you're covering the horrible things. Okay. Now, the good thing about that, if you're male or female, your spouse is good enough looking that they're going to be really upset for 3 years, but they're going to remarry. Okay. But I mean, so you look at the, and then you look at the middle. It's the middle folks I worry about, and the ones at the end. Their lifestyles just take a life, just take a life of themselves, and it's that overhead creep that we don't notice. It just slowly does it if we don't just chisel it in stone. On that Profit First book that we've mentioned in the past, I mean, I think that you ought to put that money somewhere where you can't get it. And so you're not, because you're going to be tempted.
Yeah.
It's going to be a great deal on a bass boat. There's going to be
whatever it is. That's what Dave Ramsey always says, right? Don't put it in your underwear drawer because you can get that pretty fast.
Yeah, you can. And so.
Well, so transition there a little bit, Dr. Abernathy, to the debt side. So you talked a little bit about startup debt, and maybe you've got equipment loan debt, and maybe you've got, maybe you purchased a new practice and you've got that debt.
Right. Maybe you have COVID-19 debt right now.
That's exactly right. Maybe you got an EIDL loan, or maybe you had to take out an additional line of credit to help you get through this in addition to PPP money, what have you. What would you concentrate on as a doctor right now as to how to, if you've got that debt, how to not really restructure, but have a pay down, or how would you come up with a plan to get that debt to a reasonable amount in case anything like this were ever going to happen again?
Yeah, I mean, if you're just buying a practice, I mean, let's say because I've talked to 5 doctors that bought a practice 1 month before the pandemic. Wow. Okay. I mean, that's like, you can't drive a pin with a sledgehammer up your bottom time. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really a bad pucker time. Okay. So, and I'm, again, I talked to them. I said, look, the banks are going to be flexible. They understand this. Okay. They want you for a lifetime of things that you need to borrow against or on, and said, so it's not the end of the world. Nobody wants you to go into bankruptcy. Nobody wants your practice. Okay. So just take a deep breath. This is going to work itself out. So those kind of people, just wait and see what happens. But in normal times, I usually tell doctors, school debt, again, I wanted to pay it completely off in 5 years. I mean, it always seems like the later we wait to implement savings and commitment to sound financial policies, the more difficult it is. But if they start out and they don't have this air of entitlement, I'm a doctor, I need a new car. I'm a doctor and I've got a wife and 1 kid, I deserve a new house. There are good deals on houses, and you got to have shelter. But there was a book called The Fulfillment Curve. I wish I had that diagram for you, because it just kind of goes up and over, and everything on this side to the top is like shelter, food, clothing, education, but you get to the top and it starts getting into things that you want more than you need, and the fulfillment's not there. It's like drugs. You smoke a joint, you do cocaine. I mean, that's how drug addicts, to get that same feeling, they have to keep doing. We get in that habit with money. And so when I started out, I decided how long it would take me to pay everything off, and I beat it every time. So I'm thinking, new graduate, 5 years for your school debt. Now, I'm fine with you taking on more debt if you're where you're going to be, and you can buy into a practice, and your earning capacity will allow that, and you can still save the same amount of money. Let's buy the practice. Okay. But again, on a practice debt, I would say about 7, no more than 10 years.
Yeah.
Again, most banks like to limit leasehold improvements. So we do a startup practice, leasehold improvements, and equipment to about a 7-year note.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, they'll do 10, but again, if you do 10, I would just commit myself to make sure that that note was structured in a way that was no penalties for early payoff. And even though it's amortized for 10 years, you amortize it for 7 or 5 and do it quicker and hold yourself to that.
Yeah, so basically you're saying you're going to have to sacrifice a little bit, throw some money at the debt, 5 years on a student debt.
Yep.
It reminds me of a quote. Literally, I just saw it this morning, and I'm gonna botch this, but it basically says if you put off everything till tomorrow, you're going to end up with a whole lot of empty yesterdays. It's because you got to start going. You got to start getting stuff done.
Well, you have to sit down with. I mean, this is a big part of it too. Is to sit down and talk with your spouse and be of one mind about debt and spending. And that's why there are a lot of apps out there like mint.com. I mean, once you decide, we'll do this, and you put those credit cards and stuff in there, it will notify both parties if someone goes over what you two have decided to do. And having a third party like you guys is a big help. That, I mean, there are some CPAs that couldn't get away with this. There are some financial planners that can't get away with it. But you guys have an air about you that you could probably say, Mike, you're making a mistake. He said, look, this is your practice. This is your life. I said, but I'm just telling you, you have got to save this much money. Yeah. And I look at these habits that we develop as merely a way to have more options later. Okay, that's it. It's not that I'm going to stop working early, or I'm going to sell out, or I'm going to limit the number of kids, or it just gives me more options if I save that money. I always went by this. I said, if I save my money and I don't spend it, there's a good chance it'll be there when I actually need it.
That's right.
Okay, and that's pretty stupid for a young kid that's 26, but I was so scared I would die poor.
Yeah.
And I didn't come from a family, okay? It was just kind of ingrained to me that, no one's going to pull me out of this when you have a bad time. It's not going to be the federal government with PPPs. It's not going to be the American Dental Associations with some magic wand that's going to make your practice return. You're going to have to do this yourself. And debt and savings are part of the formula that everybody needs to.
I think a big takeaway for me, just talking through this cash reserve side of things, is, we always talk 3 to 6 months. And what you said is that doesn't all have to be cash. There's a cash component, of course, but that interruption policy that's in place that can subsidize some income, maybe not during something like this, but during another time you fall and break your wrist, break your ankle or whatever, or a disaster, kicks in, you need to have that, policy in place to help with that 6 months deal.
Well, it all fits into the puzzle of the balancing act of managing your practice. And that's one thing I want to go back to a previous episode when we were actually looking at how you present what you call the P&L. And what you kind of bring up into that P&L that most accountants don't think of is debt payment. And again, you're trying to bring ratios in line, considering all things out, basically cash out the door. And that includes that service. And that's a really easy way to see whether you're over leveraged in your practice. If your ratios, especially as you're trying to ramp back up slowly, it's probably going to come to light pretty quick that a lot of cash is going out the door on certain debt that's not very productive. And that's perhaps where some emphasis should be put is on those kind of triggers. Let
me add one last third thing. We met at a Freedom Founders meeting, I think. Okay. Mm-hmm. And where I think they basically invest in self-funded real estate. Okay. But I think I made a mistake when I was younger in thinking that the best way to be financially secure was to save a pile of money so high that when I retired, I couldn't spend it all. There's another way to look at this. And so in addition to that insurance and saving that cash and having it invested so you get a return on your investment, if you invested in something that cash flowed, in other words, let's say you had a small house and you've held it 10 years and it's paid for, and it's bringing in $1,200 a month, that's one other way to kind of cover loss of income, in dentistry. You're going to find that things happen and they affect one segment of the population or investment vehicles, and it may not bother the other. And so, again, having cash flow makes a big difference. I mean, if you've got something that'll spin out $50,000 a year in rental or whatever, that's like having $1 million sitting in a bank at 5% after tax.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's, you can look at this from several different ways. The problem is you can't look at it when it's too late.
That's right.
Okay. And we're looking at it when, sorry, it's too late. We're starting over. So the younger doctors are listening to this, don't make the mistakes that we have made in the future. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There is actually something to be learned from this. And then, again, don't think that you're going to be the one that never has cancer, never goes bankrupt, never has a kid that takes drugs, never has a divorce. Bad things happen, and you need to be prepared.
They're living through that right now. They're living through it right now. They're going to have to come out with a different perspective. And these two options with the cash and the debt, the way to look at debt, those are tremendous tools to have.
Let's do this, guys. Let's leave. So we want to leave our viewers with one thing they can literally take away from this and implement in their business. And I'm gonna catch you off guard, Dr. Abernathy. What advice would you give the doctor who right now, let's say today, has opened up its doors and is going through a whole new normal and everything's different? What advice would you give them right now that they can take and basically, maybe not too tactical, but just to help them get through or begin this new normal?
And we talked about this already, but I need you to know exactly what your numbers are. Now, that's either a good thing or it fell far short. So the second thing would be, it doesn't have to be ideal. What are you willing to do to change that? And then come up with some type of agreement with yourself, some commitment, and start knocking it down. And then look at it again in 3 or 4 months, and because it's going to look different. But again, it's don't come out of this unchanged.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. Take something away from this pandemic. Make your business
please. Better. Yeah, this is like falling down, and years later you can go, that's nothing. You see, that's I was, this is a scar. It's gonna mark you, but it also can be an opportunity. And I think during every one of these, the only reason we've presented this is, this is bad, but this is a huge opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't look like that now, but it's a huge opportunity for you to change the face of your future.
Yeah. Guys, that's great stuff. I mean, my takeaway to you guys, or my biggest takeaway is, look at your cash position, start figuring out a way to accumulate cash now, look at the debt position, start getting a good debt repayment plan in place. But I think one of the most important things you said is don't put it off. Don't keep putting those things off till tomorrow. Like I said, you'll look back with a whole lot of empty yesterdays. Put a plan in place now. Start operating your business to make it the best it can be, and keep getting better. So guys, appreciate the time. We'll jump on here for another one, and take care. We'll see you.